until not a single drop is left. That's how the Anti-Federalist firebrand Luther Martin described federal taxing power under the Constitution more than a century before the 16th Amendment, the individual income tax, and the IRS. Basically, he predicted that the federal government would take basically everything and continually expand consolidated power at the expense of liberty. So on this episode, we'll do a dive into Luther Martin's long-forgotten and long-ignored warnings on the taxing power, along with views from other leading anti-federalists like George Mason, Cato, Patrick Henry, and more. But first of all, before getting to that, welcome and thank you for joining me here on the path to liberty. My name is Michael Bolden with the 10th Amendment Center, and this is the show for Wednesday, April 16th, 2025. Now, to set the stage on this, we do have to first go back to the Articles of Confederation, which actually had no power to impose, enforce, or collect any tax on any individual for any reason at all. Here, for example, from Article 8, it says, "All charges of war and all other expenses that shall be incurred for the common defense or general welfare, and allowed by the United States and Congress assembled, shall be defrayed out of a common treasury, which shall be supplied by the several states." I mean, that's really it. Supplied by the several states. No Internal Revenue Service, no federal agents, no direct taxation from the federal government at all. It was literally up to the states, not Congress, to raise the money. Congress would actually determine how much each state basically had to pony up, but it was up to the states to actually take care of this. It was known as the requisition system. Here again from Article 8, "The taxes for paying that proportion shall be laid and levied by the authority and direction of the legislatures of the several states within the time agreed upon by the United States in Congress assembled." But the Federalists viewed this system as a complete disaster. Alexander Hamilton called requisitions defective, rotten, and a failure. And James Madison listed it as the very first vice of the system under the Articles of Confederation. And the requisition system was actually one of the primary reasons that the Federalist side gave for needing what they called more energy in the general government. In fact, an entirely new system. And I covered the arguments back and forth in an episode a couple of years ago, Tax Battle, Henry versus Hamilton on the requisition system. That'll be linked to in the show notes for this episode. Now, on the other side, and we're covering the Anti-Federalists today, some, not all Anti-Federalists, did see the requisition system not as a flaw, but as a feature, a really strong positive. Patrick Henry put it like this in the Virginia Ratifying Convention. He said, "Requisitions, which gentlemen affect to despise, have nothing degrading in them. On this depends our political prosperity. I will never give up that darling word, requisitions. My country may give it up. A majority may wrest it from me, but I will never give it up till my grave." I mean, Patrick Henry certainly had a way with words. He was such a powerful speaker, but certainly there was some meaning behind this, and he continued along these lines and explained why he liked the requisition system so much, because it gave the states a tool, the ability to say no when taxes were maybe oppressive, to deliberate, even to resist. He said, "Requisitions are attended with one singular advantage. They are attended by deliberation. They secure to the states the benefit of correcting oppressive errors. If our assembly thought requisitions erroneous," said Patrick Henry, "if they thought the demand was too great, they might at least supplicate Congress to reconsider that it was a little too much." Now, well before Patrick Henry's speech, and again, that was the summer of 1788 in the Virginia Ratifying Convention, Luther Martin actually as a delegate to the Philadelphia Convention for Maryland, he actually made an attempt to at least salvage a good portion of that system in the Constitution. And here from my article on this that we published just a few days ago, Martin proposed an amendment at the Philadelphia Convention to restrict Congress's power to impose direct taxes. He proposed an option that would be the requisition system, but only allowed Congress to step up if the states failed to basically fulfill their requisitions, reserving it only as a last resort and only if a state failed to meet a federal requisition. Now, I'm not certain how effective that would have been, but it was kind of at least a middle ground that Martin was trying to navigate when he saw that so many people were on the other side wanting way more taxes. Now, I don't know what the vote total was, just off the top of my head, at least in Philadelphia there, but it was rejected, and it probably was rejected pretty easily. And back to my article, Martin pointed out that had this amendment been approved, quote, the dangerous and oppressive power in the general government of imposing direct taxes on the inhabitants, which it now enjoys in all cases, would have been only vested in it in case of the non-compliance of a state. So he was basically even willing to give that ground rather than hold on fully to the requisition system, because he definitely had not enough support to do that in the Philadelphia Convention, but saying, like, look, why don't we just say, we'll keep going with this, and then you guys can have the power that you want when we have failures. But that wasn't even good enough. And I think Martin gives a pretty good explanation why. He said, but the proposition was rejected by a majority, consistent with their aim and desire of increasing the power of the general government as far as possible and destroying the powers and influences of the states. So Martin was not messing around. As a delegate to the Philadelphia Convention, he reported on this in other areas as well. He repeatedly said there were various groups at the convention, some of which wanted all kinds of additional power, others who wanted more but not as much, and they kind of worked together to get as much as possible. And this is one of the ways that he saw that play out in taxing power. Cato, in his 6th Anti-Federalist essay, this is December of 1787, suggested something pretty similar, although he was probably not at the Philadelphia Convention. We don't know for sure because we don't know who the author is. He said, I know there are politicians who believe that you should be loaded with taxes in order to make you industrious. And perhaps there was some of this opinion in the convention. But it is an erroneous principle. I mean, the idea that somehow taxation will make you more prosperous, industrious, and maybe even more free is not new. It's not just all the idiots that say things like that today. This has been around for a long time. And Cato asked the essential question. He said, for what can inspire you with industry if the greatest measures of your labors are to be swallowed up in taxes? And so basically what they were making the case for was that we were going to be getting way more centralized power. And it's primarily just due to the general welfare clause, the taxing powers that were there, and much less liberty. And Anti-Federalists repeatedly warned some of the many ways that they expected this greater power to be used. For example, Elbridge Gerry put it like this. He said, my opinion with respect to the proposed Constitution is that if adopted, it will lay the foundation of a government of force and fraud, that the people will bleed with taxes at every pore, and that the existence of their liberties will soon be terminated. Now, I'm citing a bunch of original source documents, plus I've got an article that I published this week on Luther Martin's views specifically on taxing power. These will all be included in the show notes over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. My buddy Alan Mosley gets that organized, and there's at the top, there's going to be a quick overview of the episode. Then you have an audio player for the podcast edition, then all the video player, and then you have this show links section that will list these sources generally in the order that I go through it in the episode, as long as I give him good enough notes to work with. But he'll get that done, and I'll get it published a couple of hours after the live stream is done over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/path path to liberty. Now let's get back to Luther Martin, because in brutal detail, he really walked us through just how they'd use this kind of power to bleed us dry. He started out with this: by the power to lay and collect imposts, they may impose duties on any or every article of commerce imported into these states to what amount they please. And that was the big issue for him. No limits, no categories, no restraints. None whatsoever. But it definitely didn't just stop at the border. That wasn't the only problem. He saw a power to tax every single thing you use, every single day, any place, anywhere. He said, by the power to lay excises, the Congress may impose duties on every article of use or consumption, on the food that we eat, on the liquors we drink, on the clothes we wear, the glass which enlighten our houses, or the hearths necessary for our warmth and comfort. And he pretty much nailed it with that. But next up, he said there was still more, because next he warned they'd basically come for you. He said, by the power to lay and collect taxes, they may proceed to direct taxation on every individual, either by a capitation, a poll tax on their heads, or an assessment on their property. And from there, Martin tied all three together. And here's how he put it. By this part of the section, therefore, he's talking about the General Welfare Clause, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1 of the Constitution. By this part of the section, therefore, the government has a power to lay what duties they please on goods imported, to lay what duties they please afterwards on whatever we use or consume, to impose stamp duties to what amount they please. Again, they can do it on anything to whatever amount they please. That's what he's warning how it would play out. And then he said stamp duties, because if you think of the timing, this is 1787 and 1788, not that far long after the horrible Stamp Act in 1765, the Townshend Acts and the duties in 1767 and the like. This is one of the rallying cries of the American Revolution. But he continued, and he said, and in whatever cases they please afterwards, to impose on the people direct taxes by capitation tax or by assessment to what amount they choose. So one after another, they were going to tax and tax. Imports, domestic, your property, whatever, and whatever amount they choose, and nothing could stop them. And well, what's the end game? Luther Martin made it pretty clear. And he was pretty vivid with his analogy. Take everything. He said, and thus to sluice them at every vein, as long as they have a drop of blood, without any control, limitation, or restraint. Sounds pretty familiar, doesn't it? Well, if it doesn't, I want to be wherever you are. In Pennsylvania, the dissent of the minority of the convention, the Anti-Federalist dissent in the Pennsylvania ratifying convention, they put it like this. By virtue of their power of taxation, Congress may command the whole or any part of the property of the people. They may impose what imposts upon commerce. They may impose what land taxes, poll taxes, excises, duties on all written instruments, and duties on every other article that may judge proper, that they may judge proper, I think. In short, they said, every species of taxation, whether of an external or an internal nature, is comprised in Section the 8th of Article the 1st. Again, the Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises, to pay the debts and provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States. Of course, that is the General Welfare Clause. And then came the next problem that they warned about. In Pennsylvania here, they talked about the enforcement, because if you have such a massive taxing system, it's going to take a massive enforcement apparatus as well. And again, this is well over a century before the 16th Amendment, and they already saw it as horrible just with that. Because with taxation, they knew they were going to have a lot of problems. And here's how they put it in Pennsylvania. the power of direct taxation will further apply to every individual, as Congress may tax land, cattle, trades, occupations, etc., to any amount. And every object of internal taxation is of that nature that, however oppressive, the people will have but this alternative: either to pay the tax or let their property be taken, for all resistance will be vain. The standing army and select militia would enforce the collection. Luther Martin predicted where this kind of massive federal tax enforcement system would lead us. Not just economic control, not just more centralized power, but federal agents literally invading every part of your life. He said, by the power to lay excises, a power very odious in its nature, since it authorizes officers to go into your houses, your kitchens, your cellars, and to examine into your private concerns. And that's what takes us to the final piece. That's consolidation, or centralization of power. All the Anti-Federalists continually warn that the system, primarily due to vague power, but also tied with a taxing power, would lead to a consolidated, centralized national government, not a union of states, not a federal system whatsoever. And here's how Cato put it, again, in his 6th essay. He said, the doctrine of taxation is a very important one, and nothing requires more wisdom and prudence than the regulation of that portion which is taken from, and of that which is left to, the subject. Now, he had repeatedly rejected the notion that the system would be able to fund itself just on import duties. He's like, this is absurd. There's a lot of these vague terms. They're going to expand power. And even if they don't, there's a lot more power. And it's going to cost way more than what they're telling you. And they're going to have to keep building this cycle. More power, more money, more power, more money. We don't know which one comes first. But he said, if you anticipate what will be the enormous expense of this new government, added also to your own, that's the states, he said, little will be that portion be which will be left to you. In other words, it should be obvious, he understood that the federal government was going to get theirs. They were going to take what they were going to take. And then on top of it, the states were going to take what they were going to take. And for a lot of people, that would mean till not a drop is left. They'd be left holding an empty bag. And George Mason in the Virginia Ratifying Convention, again, this is June of 1788, he warned that pretty much just the General Welfare Clause, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1, in and of itself, would obliterate the system that they had under the Articles of Confederation and turn it into a national consolidated system. He said the assumption of this power of laying direct taxes does of itself entirely change the Confederation of the States into one consolidated government. This power, he said, being at discretion, unconfined, and without any kind of control, must carry everything before it. And this wasn't just mere speculation or hyperbole or just political talk. The Anti-Federalists read the text of what they were discussing and debating and considering for ratification. They also understood history. They had lived some history in the American Revolution. Many of them did. They understood what the British had done with arbitrary or unlimited power and with the power to do not just external but internal taxation. They saw where all of this was going to lead. They predicted what would happen. They warned about it. They tried to stop it. They didn't. But I do think we can still learn from them today. The Anti-Federalists warned us about the Constitution's taxing power. They felt it was just one symptom of a much more dangerous disease, that is, relentless consolidation or centralization of power. They sounded the alarm about unlimited taxation, oppressive enforcement, and economic subjugation, really. And this was more than a century before the 16th Amendment, before the IRS, before the individual income tax. And I think that fact alone, just on its own, give their warnings really serious weight. Because the very mechanisms that Luther Martin and George Mason and Patrick Henry and Elbridge Gerry and Cato and so many others described have become cornerstones of the oppression that they warned would happen. A system where the federal government reaches into every corner of our lives and will take every last drop that you've got. I'm sure you've noticed, but the government-run schools, the government-approved schools, never really teach us much of anything that the Anti-Federalists warned about. Maybe they'll say a few complaints here and there. Oh, they helped get a Bill of Rights. But never the real nitty-gritty details of how they predicted things would play out, especially when it comes to taxing power. And that's a big part of the reason why we work so hard every single day, not to just present one side, but to give the entire story, to explain the real history so we can make proper decisions on what needs to be done moving forward. And nothing helps us do this kind of work and reach and teach more and more people about the Constitution and liberty more than the financial faith and support of our members. If you got a couple of bucks of that quickly devaluing dirty government fiat, please consider throwing it our way over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. That's all spelled out, 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. Our membership program starts out at just $2 a month. We also have annual, 5-year, and lifetime options. Again, that's 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. And if you don't want to become a member, that's totally cool, but you still want to help pitch in and help support our work financially, or if you're already a member, that's even more awesome, and you want to pitch in a little bit more, no pressure. I just want to make sure you have the link available so you know where to go to do that. That's 10thamendmentcenter.com/donate. Now, there's a bunch of other free and easy peasy things that you can do to help us spread the word, primarily by triggering the algorithms of the mainstream platforms. The more actions you take on them, the more likely they'll show us to more people. And a lot of people have been helping out, and we're reaching way more people than I ever thought possible. We're still scratching the surface, but I really appreciate the help. So you can hit the like button, leave reviews on Apple Podcasts or any other podcast platform, comments in the archive, subscribe, get notifications on platforms like YouTube. Watch time percentage is a biggie. The more percentage of the entire video that you watch, the better, especially if you're getting into like 100 to 110 or 150 or 200%. That helps out a great deal. Any consideration you give to doing any of that, I'm very, very grateful. I am also very grateful for you spending some of your time with me today. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope it was interesting, maybe a little entertaining here or there, but more important than anything, I hope it made you think, and I hope you learned something. Again, I really appreciate you spending some of your time with me today. Thank you for watching the show or listening to it, and I look forward to seeing you next time here on the path to liberty.